Snow pressed against the church steps like the weight of heaven itself. Each flake landed soft, then froze against the stone, building tiny mounds of white that shivered in the wind. A woman lay there, curled beneath the arched doorway, her dress stiff as bark, her hair tangled into ropes that once might have been golden. She hadn't eaten in 2 days, and the last thing she'd swallowed was a mouthful of melted snow. The church bell rang every morning, 7 slow tolls that echoed down the empty street like a dirge for the living. People came and went, women clutching in books, men in wool coats and Sunday hats. None looked her way. She was a ghost of them now. Her fingers, blue to the knuckles, clutched a wooden cross she'd carved herself. Each night she whispered a prayer into it, though her voice had grown thin, almost childlike. Just one more day, Lord. Let me see the sun again. The sun came, but weakly, filtered through clouds that looked like old wool. It gave no warmth. She tried to stand once, on the 3rd day, thinking she could beg at the general store. But the storekeeper had already turned her away the week before, muttering something about charity running thin this winter. The preacher, too. He'd placed a coin in her palm and said gently, "We can't feed everyone, miss." Then the door closed, soft but final. Her name was Clara May Dalton, though she hadn't spoken aloud in weeks. She'd come from a small ranch north of Abilene, with nothing but a satchel and a fading photograph. Her husband, William Dalton, had joined a cattle drive west and never returned. She'd waited a season. Then word came. He'd been shot over a game of cards. The bank took their land before the ground thawed. She'd buried her baby near a frozen creek and walked south until her boots split open. Now, she slept on holy ground because she didn't know where else to go. At night, the wind crept under her skirts and bit her skin like a living thing. The sound of horses passing made her flinch. Once, she heard laughter, men stumbling from the saloon across the square, boots scraping the boardwalk, spurs clinking like coins. One of them shouted something cruel about church rats, and the rest roared. She turned her face to the wall, pressing her cheek against the cold stone, praying it would end. By the 5th night, her breath had turned shallow, ragged, visible even in the dark. Snow had stopped falling, but the cold had grown sharper, meaner, as if the sky wanted her gone. The street was nearly empty, just a flicker of oil lamps and windows and the soft creak of a saloon sign swinging in the wind. Somewhere, a piano stumbled through a half-drunken tune. She was past hunger now. What she felt was something slower, deeper, the kind of ache that hollows a body from the inside. The dog had come again, a mangy gray thing with ribs showing through its fur. She fed it the last of her bread, watched it lick her hand, and lay down beside it for warmth. When she closed her eyes, she dreamed of warmth, of sunlight on wooden floors, of a man's laughter. But dreams were cruel. They vanished the moment she reached for them. Then the laughter came again, this time real. 2 figures staggered from the saloon, boots slipping on the icy street. One held a bottle, the other a lantern. Their shadows loomed long across the snow. "Look at here," one slurred, pointing at her. "The church got itself a beggar angel." "Angel, hell," the other said, kicking her small wicker basket aside. Coins scattered and rolled down the steps. "She's a vagrant, maybe a whore dressed like a widow." She flinched but didn't move. Moving only made them angrier. "Say something, sweetheart." A rough hand caught her chin, jerking her face up. The lantern light burned her eyes. "Ain't you got manners?" Her throat worked, but no sound came. The dog growled low. One of the men kicked it hard. It yelped and vanished into the alley. The man laughed. "See? Even the mutt don't want you." Something in her broke then, not loudly, not with tears, but with silence. Her eyes went hollow, the kind of hollow that made men uneasy if they looked too long. "Leave her be." The voice came from the shadows, steady, low, unmistakably sober. The 2 men turned, lantern light trembling. A man stepped forward, snow crunching beneath his boots. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a long brown coat dusted white. A worn Stetson shadowed his face, but his voice carried the kind of authority that didn't need a badge. "Didn't you hear me?" he said. "Leave the lady be." "Who the hell are you?" one of them spat. He didn't answer, just let his hand drop near his revolver. The motion was slow, deliberate. The street went still. The drunk with the lantern backed up first, muttering. The other cursed under his breath, then followed. Their laughter faded into the wind. The stranger waited until the sound disappeared completely, then turned toward her. "Ma'am." She shrank back, expecting another cruel word, another kick, but none came. He crouched, careful not to crowd her. His breath misted in the cold air. Up close, she saw his face, creased with age, a week's worth of beard, eyes the color of winter sky. "You got a name?" She hesitated, voice barely a whisper. "Clara." "Well, Miss Clara," he said gently, unbuttoning his coat, "I reckon you can't stay here. I can't go nowhere else." He studied her for a moment, then nodded, as if understanding something only he could see. "Then we'll call this somewhere else for now." He draped his coat around her shoulders. It smelled of leather and tobacco. "Easy now." He offered his hand, palm up, rough but steady. "Ain't gonna hurt you." She didn't take it first. The last man who'd offered her help had taken more than he'd given, but the cold was a cruel persuader. Finally, she let him pull her up. Her knees buckled, and he caught her before she fell. "Can you ride?" She shook her head. "Then you'll ride with me." He led her toward the dark shape of a horse tethered nearby. The animal snorted softly, pawing at the ground. He lifted her gently into the saddle and climbed up behind her, his arm firm around her waist to keep her steady. The church bell rang once, far behind them, as they rode out into the snow. The night opened around them, wide, silent, endless. The horses' hooves sank deep into the snow, muffling their passage. The air stung her face, but beneath the stranger's coat, warmth began to creep back into her bones. She dared not speak. Every time she'd trusted someone, the world had taken something in return. So she stared ahead, eyes unfocused, the landscape blurring into shades of gray. After a long while, he said, "Name's Elias. Elias Boone." She didn't answer. He nodded to himself, as if conversation wasn't his habit anyway. "Don't talk much myself. Just figured it'd be good to know what to call each other if the wolves come sniffing." "Wolves." He smiled faintly. "They like hungry folks. You and me both qualify." Somehow, that made her laugh, a quiet, breathless sound that startled her as much as him. They rode on. The wind howled through the cottonwoods, bending their thin black arms. The moon rose, pale and sharp-edged, throwing long shadows across the snow. Somewhere far off, a coyote cried, and another answered. He guided the horse off the main trail, toward a cluster of low hills. "There's an old line cabin not far. Belonged to a cattle outfit that folded last winter. Roof leaks, but it'll keep the frost out." "Why?" she asked finally, voice hoarse. He glanced down at her. "Why what?" "Why'd you help me?" He thought a moment before answering. "Guess I seen enough death this winter. Didn't care to see one more." She studied his face in the moonlight, hard lines softened by snow. There was something sorrowful in him, too, something quiet and buried. He reached into his coat and pulled out a flask. "Ain't water, but it'll warm you." She hesitated, then took a small sip. Whiskey burned down her throat, spreading fire to her chest. "Better?" She nodded. "Good." He shifted slightly, reins loose in his hand. "You hold on now. We got a few miles to go." The world around them seemed to hum. The slow rhythm of the horse, the whisper of wind through bare trees. It wasn't peace exactly, but it was something close. After a while, she spoke again, almost to herself. 5 days. "What's that?" "I slept there 5 days. On those steps. Thought maybe someone noticed." His jaw tightened. Some folks don't see what ain't their problem. She turned her face into his coat, eyes closing. "You did." He didn't answer, but she felt the shift in his breathing, the quiet weight of a man who'd seen too much kindness go unrewarded. When they reached the cabin, dawn was only a rumor on the horizon. The sky had begun to lighten, pale blue edging into gray. He dismounted first, then helped her down, steadying her as her feet touched the ground. The door hung crooked, but the inside was dry. A few logs lay stacked in the corner. He knelt, struck a match, and coaxed a small flame to life. Orange light spilled across the walls, flickering over his face. He handed her a tin cup of coffee, steaming and bitter. She drank greedily, wincing at the taste but savoring the heat. "Rest," he said, spreading his bedroll by the fire. "You'll need it." She lay down, pulling his coat tighter around her shoulders. Her eyes followed him as he stepped outside to tend the horse, his silhouette framed against the snow. The flames crackled softly. The church, the cold, the laughter, all of it faded like a bad dream. For the first time in 5 days, she wasn't afraid. And as her eyes drifted shut, one thought remained, faint but fierce. Maybe the Lord had sent her help after all. Maybe this lonely cowboy was the answer she'd been praying for. When Clara woke, the fire had burned down to embers, and pale light crept through the cracks in the cabin walls. The smell with smoke and boiled coffee hung heavy in the air. For a long moment she didn't move, afraid the warmth might vanish if she opened her eyes. The ruffled blanket wrapped around her still held his scent, tobacco, leather, and a faint trace of horse sweat. It was the smell of the frontier itself, lonely, raw, alive. Elias Boone sat by the stove, hat low over his brow, hands wrapped around a tin cup. He looked like he'd been awake for hours. The lines around his eyes were deeper than she'd noticed last night, carved by years of sun and silence. "Morning," he said without turning. She stirred, sitting up slow. The cabin creaked around her. "You been watching me?" He gave a half-smile. "Ain't much else to look at round here." She flushed, clutching the blanket tighter. Her voice cracked from disuse. "You got family out here?" "Had," he said simply. "Not anymore." The words hung in the air, final as a gunshot. He poured her coffee, black and bitter, handed it over without meeting her eyes. She took it, the tin hot against her palms. Outside, wind scraped along the roof like claws. After a while, she said, "I can pay you back somehow." He shook his head. "Don't need paying. You were cold. I had fire. World simple when you keep it that way." She studied him, his weathered coat, the small scar beneath his jaw, the way he stared into nothing as if he saw a ghost there. "You always as kind?" He looked at her then, one eyebrow lifting. "You always as suspicious?" She almost smiled. "Guess the world taught me that lesson early." He nodded, as though he understood too well. By afternoon, the storm had eased, the sky a pale sweep of white. He saddled the horse again, packed his meager gear, and handed her a coat that looked twice her size. "Cabin's not fit for more than a night. There's a ranch a few days south, place I've been meaning to reach. You're welcome to ride along." She hesitated. "I'd just slow you down." "Lady, I've been riding alone too long. Little company might do us both good." His tone was calm, but there was something behind it, a quiet ache she couldn't name. And so they rode. The snow crunched under the horse's hooves, slow and steady. The air was knife cold, but the motion kept their blood moving. Every few miles, he'd glance over his shoulder, scanning the tree line like a man who'd learned never to trust peace for long. The wind grew stronger that night. By dusk, the sky turned iron gray, and the land fell away into rolling hills thick with pine. Elias found a clearing, small enough to hide a fire. He worked in silence, unpacking, gathering branches, striking a spark. Clara tried to help, her fingers stiff with cold, but he took over when he saw her shivering. "Sit," he said, voice rough but not unkind. "You'll freeze before you light that." She sank to her knees beside the small blaze, watching him work. The fire lit his face, strong jaw, a nose slightly bent like it had been broken once, and eyes that caught the light in glints of steel. He cooked beans in a blackened pot and handed her a tin plate. They ate without talking, the crackle of the fire filling the silence. When she finished, she whispered, "You still haven't told me why you were in that town." He poked at the fire. "Wasn't in it. Just passed through." "Looking for something?" He gave a small, humorless laugh. "Ain't we all?" She wanted press, but something in his tone warned her not to. So she stared into flames instead, letting the warmth thaw the numb ache in her limbs. Hours passed. The wind outside picked up, moaning through the trees. Elias rose, tossing another log on the fire. Storm's blowing and we'll hole up here till morning. Clara nodded. I'm sorry you got stuck with me. He glanced at her. Don't say that. Ain't stuck. Chose it. That's a prize or more than she cared to admit. When she lay down on the blanket he'd spread, exhaustion hit her like a hammer. The sound of the fire, the steady rhythm of his movements, it lulled her towards sleep. But just as her eyes closed, something snapped outside, sharp, close. Elias was up before she could speak. Rifle in hand, he motioned her quiet. The firelight flickered over the door, over the tension in his shoulders. A low growl echoed from the tree-line. Then another. Wolves, he murmured. She froze, heart-thudding. He stepped to the door, eased it open, and fired once into the dark. The crack split the silence. Snow fell from branches in startled flurries. The growls faded to whimpers, then vanished. When he came back, he wasn't smiling. They'll circle back. We move at first light. She wanted to ask how he'd stayed alive out here so long. How a man could live on the edge of civilization with nothing but a horse, a rifle, and silence. But the answer was already written in his face. Before dawn, the storm hit full force. Snow whipped sideways, filling the air like sand. The fire sputtered out. Elias braced the door with his body, fighting the wind. Blanket, he shouted. Keep your face covered. The cold tore through the gaps in the wall, numbing everything it touched. She huddled near him, their shoulders pressed together, the sound of the storm deafening. For hours it raged. He held his coat open, shielding her from the drafts. At some point, exhaustion pulled her under again. When she woke, the storm had passed. The world outside was blinding white. Elias was gone. Panic hit her hard. She stumbled outside, boots sinking deep. The wind had died, leaving a silence that felt too large. Then she saw him, half buried in snow by the horse, hacking at ice to reach the water trough. She rushed to him. What are you doing? You'll freeze to death. He looked up, frost on his beard. Horse needs water. We need the horse. His hands were red, raw, trembling from cold. Without thinking, she pulled off her shawl and wrapped it around his neck. You're mad, she said. Maybe, he said, smiling faintly. But we're alive. That night, as they shared the last of beans, she asked softly, You ever think God forgot this place? He stared into the fire, jaw tightening. Sometimes. But maybe he just wants to see what we'll do when we're on our own. She looked at him differently after that. The storm had peeled away something, his gruffness, her fear, and left them both bare. By the third day, they reached open plains again. The snow thinned, turning to patches of mud and frost. Clara rode easier now, wrapped in his old duster, the reins loose in her gloved hands. Elias led the way, scanning the horizon like a man who trusted his instincts more than maps. At midday, they stopped by a creek. He knelt to fill their canteens, the wind tugging at his hat. She sat on a rock nearby, staring at the frozen water, remembering how she'd once tried to break ice with her bare hands to drink. You think much about the past? He asked without looking up. Only when I can't help it. That often? She smiled faintly. Too often. He nodded. It's heavy, ain't it? What we carry. The word stuck with her long after they started riding again. By evening, clouds gathered once more. A faint unease hung in the air, something beyond weather. Elias slowed his horse, eyes narrowing. What is it? She whispered. Tracks. He dismounted, crouching low. 3 riders. Been following our trail since yesterday. Her stomach tightened. Those men from the town? Could be. What do they want? He straightened, rifle in hand. Trouble usually don't need a reason. They pressed on through dusk, not stopping till the sky went black. Every sound, every crack of twig, made her flinch. He noticed but said nothing. When they finally made camp, he didn't light a fire. Smoke would give us away. The cold bit deep, but neither complained. They sat side by side under a starlit sky, breath misting in the dark. Elias? She said softly. Yeah. If they come back, what do you do? He looked at her, eyes calm. Same thing I did the first time. She wanted to believe that was enough, but fear had a way of finding cracks. He reached into his saddlebag, pulled out a small wooden box, and handed it to her. Inside lay a silver locket, tarnished but still beautiful. My wife, she said, found in the ashes after the fever took 'em both. I'm sorry, he shrugged. You don't know sorrow, just understanding. She closed the box gently. You ever stop missing her? He stared out into the dark. Don't reckon so. But some hurts just change shape. Don't fade, just fit better after a while. The wind rustled through the grass. The silence that followed wasn't empty, it was shared. By morning, they were on the move again. Clara's legs ached, her hands blistered from the reins, but she didn't complain. Each mile between her and that church felt like another piece of herself returning. When they crested a ridge at midday, Elias pointed ahead. See that valley? She nodded. My place is down there. Ain't much, just a house and a barn, but it's home. A strange tightness filled her chest. Home. The word felt foreign on her tongue. You sure you want to take me there? She asked quietly. He looked at her with something close to a smile. Ain't no loss as a man can't share what little good he's got. They rode down slow. The valley opened before them. Rolling fields blanketed in pale light. A small river winding through. Smoke rose from a chimney in the distance. Clara felt tears sting her eyes. For the first time in months, maybe years, she felt like she was riding toward something instead of away. When they reached the gate, he dismounted and helped her down. His hand lingered just a moment longer than needed. Welcome home, he said softly. She looked at the weathered porch, the wildflowers pushing through the frost, the light spilling from the single window. It was rough, lonely, imperfect, but it was hope made real. As they stood there in the fading light, two broken souls wrapped in the last chill of winter, Clara realized something she hadn't dared believe since the night her world ended. Sometimes salvation doesn't come from heaven at all. It rides up slow on a tired horse, speaks plain, and says, you can rest now. The storm had rolled out before sunrise, leaving the plains washed clean, quiet as a churchyard. Mist clung to the grass, and the earth smelled of rain and smoke. The small fire crackled low, throwing faint light on their faces, hers pale from exhaustion, his drawn but calmer than before. Lydia stirred first. Her hair clung damp to her temples, and her dress, torn from the day before, still clung with cold. For a moment, she didn't remember where she was. Then she saw him, slumped beside the ashes, hat over his chest, rifle across his knees. She watched him breathe, slow, steady, alive. She didn't mean to smile, but she did. He woke a minute later, the same way a man might when he's not sure he's earned another morning. His eyes flicked toward her. You sleep any? A little, she said softly. You. He chuckled dryly. Didn't expect to. Storm like that can drag ghosts out of the ground. She nodded. Her eyes drifted toward the distance, the horizon just beginning to glow with a muted gold. It's quieter than I thought it'd be, she whispered. He followed her gaze. That's the thing about this land, he said. It's never as empty as it looks. It remembers. They sat in silence. Only the whisper of wind and the far-off call of a hawk broke the stillness. After a while, she rose to gather the blanket tighter around herself. Her voice, careful and hesitant, cut through the calm. You told me last night about your wife, about the fire. He didn't look at her. Yeah. I'm sorry, she said. I shouldn't have asked. He shook his head. You didn't ask. I just needed to let it out, I guess. The pause between them stretched, not uncomfortable, just heavy with things left unsaid. Then she said, You lost your home. I lost mine. Maybe that's what made you stop for me. He looked up, finally meeting her eyes. Maybe it's what made me notice you. But stopping was something else. Felt like if I kept riding, I'd end up the same as that fire, just ashes blowing down river. Lydia didn't speak. Her throat tightened with something unnameable. He turned his attention back to the embers. Ain't much sense in keeping to yourself forever. World's hard enough with two hands on the reins. She smiled faintly. You talk like a man who's done both, riding alone and with someone. Maybe, he said, and I know which one hurts less. The sun broke through then, not bright, but honest, the kind that made the wet grass steam and the world look born new. They packed what little they had, his canteen, her shawl, a bit of jerky, the horse still tethered under the mesquite. The trail back to his ranch would take most of the day, but something in the air felt changed, lighter, though Nita would say so aloud. By midday, the sky had cleared fully. They rode side by side, the land stretching endless ahead of them. Wind teased at her hair, and he caught himself glancing over. Not the way a man looks at beauty, but the way a man watches to make sure something fragile doesn't break. They stopped near a dry creek bed to water the horse. Lydia knelt by the edge, touching the ground. This place, she murmured, it's cruel, but it's honest. It gives what it gives, takes what it wants. He smiled faintly. You sound like somebody who's starting to understand it. Maybe I am. She looked up. Or maybe it's starting to understand me. He laughed once, the first real laugh she'd heard from him. You talk like a preacher sometimes. I used to pray, she said quieter now. When my husband died, I thought God would send help. I thought he'd send someone to find me and the baby, but help never came. So I stopped praying. He lowered his gaze. And then you ended up on church steps. Yeah, she said, her voice trembling. Guess I wasn't done with him after all. He watched her, eyes dark and thoughtful. Maybe he sent the wrong kind of help, he murmured. Or maybe, she said, meeting his gaze, he sent the kind I needed. For a while there was peace. They rode again, the wind at their backs. The ranch not far now. But peace is a fragile thing in the West. By late afternoon, they reached the edge of his land. Fence lines half broken, the barn leaning from years of neglect. Smoke rose from somewhere beyond the ridge. He stiffened. That ain't my fire, he said sharply. They spurred the horse forward. When they crested the hill, the sight hit hard. Two men near the barn, rifles slung, one kicking open the door. Strangers, drifters. His jaw set. Stay here. Like hell, she said, eyes flashing. He glanced at her, surprised, maybe impressed. You got grit, he said, but grit'll get you killed if you ain't careful. I've already been half dead, she replied. Let me help. For a second, he almost argued. Then he nodded. They moved down the hill quietly, the smell of smoke thicker now. He handed her a revolver from his saddlebag. Safety ain't much, he muttered, but point it and pull if you have to. Her hands trembled as she took it. You trust me with this? He met her eyes. I would not have handed it to you if I didn't. The first shot cracked the silence wide open. A bullet snapped through the air and buried itself in the barn wall. The cowboy dug behind a trough, pulling Lydia with him. Stay low, he barked. Another shot rang out. Splintering would near her head. She gasped, pressing into the dirt. The air stank of gunpowder and fear. He peered around the corner. Two men, rough-looking, one with a red bandana, the other with a scar running from jaw to temple. Rustlers, the kind who pick bones clean. Those horses ain't theirs, the cowboy muttered. They're mine. Lydia's pulse thudded. What do we do? He checked his rifle. We end it quick. Before she could speak, he broke from cover, rolling into the open and firing. One rustler went down hard. The other ducked behind the barn. Damn it, the cowboy hissed, reloading fast. Lydia crawled closer to the wagon for cover. Her hands shook around the revolver. She'd never fired one, never even held one till today. The scarred man shouted, "We don't want no trouble, old man, just the horses." He answered by cocking the rifle. "Then you best leave 'em where they stand." The scarred man fired back, missed by inches. With chips flew. Lydia flinched. Her heart hammered in her throat. The cowboy was pinned, no clean shot. The rustler was circling wide toward the corral. If he got behind them, it'd be over. Lydia swallowed hard. "I can see him," she whispered. "Don't," he started, but she was already up. Her hand rose. The revolver felt heavy, wrong, but she aimed, just like he showed her. She squeezed the trigger. The sound split the air. The man stumbled, shot clean in the shoulder. He went down swearing, clutching his arm. The cowboy turned, astonished. Then he grinned, almost proud. Hell, remind me not to argue with you again. She stood shaking, smoke rising from the gun. I didn't kill him. You did fine, he said, stepping over. You did what you had to. They tied the wounded rustler, the other one already dead. It took till sunset to fix the barn door, but when they finally stood together in the fading light, something in both of them had settled. He turned to her. You could leave, you know. Ride to town, start fresh. Nobody'd blame you. She looked around, the fences, the open sky, the place that still smelled like rain and smoke and second chances. And you? She asked. He looked at her long and quiet. I'd just go back to talking to ghosts. She stepped closer. Then maybe I'll stay. He didn't smile this time. Not really. Just that look. Tired, honest, grateful. You sure? She nodded. You saved me. I shot for you. Guess that makes us even. He shook his head. Ain't how I see it. You brought me back to life, Lydia. Her breath caught. The wind rose gently, stirring the dry grass. They stood side by side as twilight deepened. The land around them felt still, as if holding its breath. Storms passed, he murmured. Maybe for both of us, she said. He reached up, tipping his hat. You'll do fine here. The ranch, it could use some laughter again. And you, she asked. He smiled faintly. Could use the same. Night fell. They lit a small fire near the barn. The stars came out sharp and endless. For the first time since she left her old life behind, Lydia felt something like peace. Not the kind you pray for. The kind you earn. She looked over at him, this quiet, scarred man who'd stopped on a cold road and said 3 words that changed everything. Let's go home. And maybe, just maybe, she finally had. Sometimes, salvation doesn't come in sermons or silver crosses. Sometimes it rides up dusty roads, quiet as wind, wearing a worn hat and a heart half mended. And sometimes, all it takes to start again is someone who refuses to keep riding past. If this story moved you, share it. Maybe someone out there still waiting on their own, let's go home.